we often delude ourselves into thinking that funerals are the end of all suffering. But the harsh reality shows the opposite. For Black legends, death is not rest, but the moment when the scene of a silent murder, fueled by ambition and ruthlessness, is revealed. Behind the silk cloths that try to conceal the smell of the corpse, the sordidest truths are exposed. A society that has exploited their labor and then cast them into graves in cold indifference. It's hard not to feel a chill down your spine at the sight of men in black standing silently outside the cemetery fence, watching the coffin of a genius drummer shot in the back, while the perpetrator may well be praying in the middle of the funeral. Equally bitter is the sordid scene of three women, each holding a marriage certificate, fighting over a few pennies right in front of their husband's still warm corpse. But the ultimate cruelty lies in the $2 receipt placed beside a bankrupt celebrity. And her daughter, barely in her 20s, but with the intelligence of a 4-year-old, stands bewildered, innocently smiling at her mother as if she were a distant stranger. Lying down is not rest, but the final deception for those exhausted to entertain a world ready to snatch up their last vestiges of glory and then discard them before their bodies even have a chance to cool. Dive into the most cruel, dark corners behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood with 23 gloomy scenes at the funerals of Black celebrities. A journey to unveil the darkest secrets behind the coffin lid, where death is not as painful as the betrayal and debts unearthed right on the coffin of the most unfortunate Black stars. 1. Lee Morgan, blood clot on the trumpet key. A dark, dried bloodstain clung to the silver trumpet keys, frozen in the biting cold of the 1972 New York snowstorm. The only thing directly greeting those who came to bid farewell to Lee Morgan, the trumpet prodigy who redefined the face of hard bop before succumbing at the age of 33. In the silent funeral home, no one bothered to look at the flowers or the empty condolences. All eyes were fixed on the trumpet placed on the coffin lid. Under the dim light, the deep red stain on the keys stood out as a cruel mark. Blood that had gushed out when he was shot dead on stage at Slugs Club, frozen solid by the cold before anyone could touch it. That blood-stained key was a cruel truth. A melody extinguished at its most brilliant moment by the very woman who had sworn her love and pulled him out of the dark mire of heroin addiction. That night, the snow fell so heavily that New York felt suffocated, but the blizzard was merely a pretext for a harsher truth. You may be a king on stage, but in the eyes of this system, you're still just a black name on a scrap of paper. When Helen Moore's bullet lodged in Lee's chest, the sirens died down, giving way to gasps on the dusty wooden floor and the smell of cheap alcohol. The ambulance didn't frantically screech and weave through the snow to save his life. They were unhurried because in our neighborhoods, people are used to letting a black soul find its own way to the afterlife. Lee Morgan lay dying amidst the fragments of his glory, a testament to a reality. Talent is not a pass to be treated like a human being in a society that never prioritizes your life. The bloodstain on the trumpet's keys on the day of his funeral is a belated confession of a toxic relationship disguised as salvation that Lee had kept hidden for years. Helen Moore saved him from addiction, but the bloodstain betrays her desire to possess him as a decorative object for her self-esteem. When Lee rediscovered himself and wanted to leave, she chose to end his life. The moment the blood clung to the instrument shows Lee clinging to the trumpet as the only thing that truly belonged to him before being murdered by the wife who had once claimed to protect him. This is the raw, hidden truth. The most terrifying enemy is not outside, but sitting right in our own home, eating at the same table and sleeping in the same bed with us. Looking at the rows of seats at the funeral, you could clearly see the price of black fame. The wealthy white record label owners who had profited from Lee's success were completely absent. For them, the death of an artist meant a broken money-making machine. The room was filled only with young musicians with stunned faces and impoverished fans who had braved the snowstorm by bus or on foot to see him one last time. Helen Moore was now behind bars, leaving Lee Morgan there alone with his blood-stained trumpet in the arms of the impoverished community, the only ones who truly understood the pain of a soul torn apart at the height of its career. 2. Al Jackson Jr. 5 dark figures outside the cemetery fence. 5 bullets lodged in the back of a deserted house with no sign of forced entry. And then, at the funeral that followed, 5 mysterious figures stood silently outside the cemetery fence, like haunting final punctuation marks for the life of Al Jackson Jr. The legendary drummer of Stax Records, known as the Artificial Rhythm Machine, who kept the rhythm for an entire era of soul music in Memphis. Al Jackson Jr. lay there in his coffin, but the funeral home was filled not only with weeping, but also with a chilling sense of suspicion. The eyes of the mourners were not focused on the wreaths, but on the 5 men in black standing completely separate from the crowd outside the iron fence. They did not enter for the ceremony, did not offer condolences, but also did not leave. It was a silent, menacing scene where the perpetrators seemed to be standing right in the sight of the deceased, witnessing the ultimate collapse of a betrayed icon. The death of Al Jackson Jr. in 1975 was an indictment of an era where the success of a black man was always accompanied by hidden guns lurking in the shadows behind his back. In a Memphis seething with violence, Jackson was murdered in what should have been his safest haven. Yet the impeccably clean crime scene, devoid of any signs of forced entry, exposed the decay of a community where trust was broken by greed. It revealed the reality that our black heroes of the time not only faced harsh social stigma, but also had to be wary of self-proclaimed brothers-in-arms, willing to trade the lives of geniuses for the dark gains of gangs and bloody insurance deals. The somber funeral scene exposed the betrayal within his own family that Al Jackson Jr. carried to his grave. 5 fatal gunshot wounds to the back and the appearance of shadowy figures outside the fence were a cruel confirmation that the perpetrator knew every habit and every path in his house. Whispers circulated about the absence of any satisfactory explanation from his wife, present at the scene, the sole survivor of the shooting, yet offering contradictory accounts of the intruder. This funeral was not a place of remembrance, but a place where stark reality was revealed. Behind the resounding drumbeats that captivated millions was a lonely man, surrounded by those who proclaimed themselves friends, waiting for the moment he turned his back to end a life of glory. The fickleness of the glamorous world of music is starkly revealed in the empty seats of the stars who once shone brightly on the charts thanks to Jackson's drumming. While his sworn colleagues are now silent, fearing repercussions from a gang-related purge, the cemetery grounds are filled with impoverished fans from Memphis's poorest neighborhoods. They stand there, forming a human wall against the menacing shadows outside the fence to protect the final dignity of their conductor. The loyalty of these anonymous fans is the answer to the world. Even if authorities want to close this case in silence, the drumming of Al Jackson Jr. will be guarded by hearts that have never known betrayal.
Will those 5 shots be forgotten because they're unsolved? Or because people chose to stop caring once he was no longer useful?
3. Dinah Washington, empty sleeping pill bottles and the final act of her ex-husbands. Amidst the smoky, expensive, perfume-filled atmosphere of Chicago in 1963, the body of Queen of the Blues, Dinah Washington, appeared as a lavish yet ironic exhibit. The woman who once possessed a powerful, razor-sharp voice lay motionless, surrounded by a peculiar retinue. 7 ex-husbands, men who had crossed paths with her, standing around her coffin, their faces feigning shock, but their minds preoccupied with calculating the vast royalties and assets she left behind. Dinah died at the age of 39 after a fateful night of partying, where the deadly combination of hard liquor and empty bottles of weight loss and sleeping pills brought an end to a life that had yearned for love but received only exploitation. The stark reality of the scene lay not in the ornate coffin, but in the vast empty spaces in the VIP seating area, which should have belonged to the musical elite and the friends who had benefited from her fame. The most powerful figures in entertainment made a fleeting parade, stopping by as a diplomatic formality before quickly disappearing into the shadows of other parties, leaving Dinah amidst a chaotic family drama. In the dark corners of the room, where the candlelight did not reach, only the impoverished musicians with calloused hands and the working-class fans truly trembled with sobs. They were the only ones who did not see the gold mine in the coffin, but only a shattered soul drained dry in exchange for heart-wrenching, agonizing blues music. The darkest secret of this farewell lies in the chilling solitude of a diva dubbed difficult and haughty. The raw reality reveals that the opulence surrounding the funeral was merely a thick layer of makeup to conceal the fact that Dinah died from an unnamed pain that sleeping pills could not alleviate. The empty vials found beside her bed were like the final notes of a tragic symphony, denouncing a life constantly reliant on chemicals to maintain self-confidence and public image. The poignant twist is that while her ex-husbands were secretly arguing over her inheritance, the real legacy, her divine voice, was being embraced by her impoverished fans in the most sincere tears. The fickleness of fame was starkly revealed as bottles of liquor were uncorked backstage at the funeral home, turning the farewell into a chaotic gathering where people discussed her scandals rather than respecting a talent whose life had been tragically cut short. Dinah Washington lay there, bitterly serene amidst the murky mix of greed and indifference. She departed, taking the title of Queen to the grave, leaving behind a funeral scene reeking of drugs and alcohol as a cruel reminder. In the world of fame, when the final note fades and the vials are empty, all that remains are the vultures waiting to devour the remnants of a legend's body. 4. Paul Williams, dried bloodstain on a white vest. The cold light in the Detroit funeral home that year didn't illuminate the gold medals or the dazzling posters, but focused on a dark, dry brown stain on the chest of Paul Williams' pristine white performance vest. Lying silently in his casket, Paul, the founder and dance soul of the legendary band, The Temptations, looked as if he were still preparing for a tour, if not for the horrific bullet hole in his chest. The white vest, once a symbol of the elegance and dazzling aura of the Motown empire, had become a haunting shroud, a testament to the moment Paul ended his own life in a solitary car, just a few blocks from the record label where he had made history. The death of Paul Williams in 1973 exposed the cruel face of the American entertainment industry towards black artists. You're a star when you can dance, but you're mercilessly discarded when your legs give way. In an era where the perfection of black boy bands was excessively glorified, Paul was marginalized as sickle cell disease and alcoholism ravaged his body. His suicide near Motown headquarters was a powerful indictment of an age where black artists were treated as mere pawns in a brutal commercial game. They were exploited and abandoned in the silence of the system when they could no longer generate profit. The dried blood stain on the white fabric of the farewell revealed the secret of a deeply wounded soul, cleverly concealed by the graceful dances of his lifetime. The white vest, designed to shine under the spotlight, now exposed the inner turmoil of a man unable to find his worth after being stripped of his glory. That bloodstain is a realistic twist, showing that the pain of oblivion is more terrifying than physical illness. It tells the story of a man who spent his life beautifying the world but could not find a reason to save himself, choosing to leave a permanent mark on the uniform of glory as a final act of defiance. The harsh realities of the spotlight were evident as the bandmates of The Temptations stood around the coffin, their faces a mixture of grief and relief at no longer having to carry the burden of a failed member. While record label executives offered empty condolences to maintain their image in front of the press, outside, impoverished fans waited for hours in the rain just to catch a last glimpse of their idol's white suit. The loyalty of those who had never shaken Paul's hand, who had never shared his wealth, was the only solace in a funeral space reeking of expensive perfume but devoid of genuine affection. Paul Williams departed, taking the bloodstains on his white suit to the grave, leaving behind a painful question for all who remain about the true price of fame. 5. Daryl Banks, the cracked single, and the corpse-like makeup. In a dilapidated corner of the Detroit funeral home, where the chill of oblivion seemed to freeze even the empty seats, there were no fresh flowers or mournful music for Daryl Banks. The only ornament present beside the coffin was a cracked 45 RPM single, the original of Open the Door to Your Heart, the treasure of the man with the powerful soul voice who met his brutal end at the hands of a plainclothes officer. The yellowish light shone directly on the thick layer of makeup on Banks's face, a clumsy and somewhat gruesome attempt by the funeral home staff to conceal the fatal bullet wound that had pierced his body after a bitter argument. The scene was suffocatingly cruel, where a recording that would later fetch tens of thousands of dollars at auction lay abandoned beside a body left to fend for itself by the justice system. The death of Daryl Banks in February 1970 was a dagger to the illusion of safety for black men in America. You could be a talented artist on record, but when you stepped out onto the streets, you were a moving target in the eyes of law enforcement. The shooting of a rising star by an unmarked police officer in broad daylight exposed the truth of an era where the right to life for the black community was a luxury easily taken away by any abuse of power. It exposed a society where petty personal conflicts were not resolved by law, but by public executions in the name of self-defense, making the life of a brilliant soul singer suddenly cheaper than the lead bullet lodged deep in his chest. The split vinyl record placed beside the coffin revealed a secret unfinished business that the media at the time deliberately ignored to protect the perpetrators. Banks' career was stifled at the very moment his legacy became priceless. No matter how thick the makeup on the corpse, it could not conceal the brutal violence. It only further highlighted the truth that Banks died in misunderstanding, branded a troublemaker, instead of being celebrated as a musical legend. This somber scene is a testament to a soul trapped between a yearning for love and the harsh reality of momentary outbursts, leaving behind a life irreparably shattered, just like the shape of the broken vinyl record left on the decaying wooden table. The callousness of his fame was evident in the empty seats, devoid of colleagues or record label representatives, those who had courted his voice when it was a golden goose. In the cold, deathly room, only a few grieving relatives gazed at the mutilated body, while the press outside nonchalantly ran soulless headlines about a criminal-related shooting to cover up police abuse of power. The only remaining loyalty belonged to the impoverished fans in Detroit, who understood that the shattered single was a fragment of an American dream that had been shot to pieces. Daryl Banks departed in the terrifying silence of justice, leaving behind a funeral scene reeking of gunpowder and a soul music genre forever without its lead singer. 6. Jackie Wilson, the rhythmic tapping of a stick in a silent shared house. At a cheap funeral home in New Jersey, where the dusty smell of oblivion overpowered the scent of flowers, the air was thick with a humiliating silence. Amidst the farewell ceremony for Jackie Wilson, the man once hailed as Mr. Excitement, whose spins and soaring vocals redefined the concept of performance for a generation, life had come to a permanent halt after a decade in a vegetative state. As the empty eulogies faded, a harsh sound echoed, tap, tap, tap. It was the rhythmic tapping of an elderly fan's wooden cane on the cold stone floor, a solitary rhythm attempting to awaken the masterful dance steps now forever immobile in the coffin. The scene was starkly cruel, the only sound bidding farewell to the king of the stage, not the applause of thousands, but the sound of wood striking stone in an eerily silent room. Jackie Wilson's death in 1984 was a direct slap in the face to the illusion of glamour. You could collapse from a stroke on stage in front of tens of thousands in 1975, but shortly afterward, you would be thrown into a corner of a public nursing home in Mount Holly to slowly die in solitude for 9 years. The stark reality revealed that behind the glittering suits was a man who died in utter destitution, unable to afford even a decent headstone unless he received pennies from the compassionate donations of his poorest fans. It exposed the transience of fame, where a once dominant icon was treated as a discarded piece of the entertainment industry the moment his breath ceased to generate profit. The presence of a multitude of empty seats at the funeral was the most painful scar of reality, exposing a secret that the music industry has always tried to conceal. None of the contemporary stars, those who had borrowed Jackie's every kick and performance style to build their own empires, showed up. They feared the curse of a fated genius, feared facing their own fate in the form of a forgotten man. The rhythmic tapping of the anonymous man's cane was a powerful indictment of the giants of the music empire. Those who had squeezed the sweat out of Mr. Excitement only to let him go with chilling coldness. Looking at the desolate funeral scene, one can see who truly remained behind for the soul of a man of color. The elite had long since turned their backs, leaving only impoverished fans trudging through the slums barefoot to see their idol one last time. The rhythmic tapping of the cane echoed, recalling a glorious era when Jackie Wilson could have sent concert halls into a frenzy with a snap of his fingers, a stark contrast to the silent reality of a neglected corpse. He departed in the quiet solitude of an empty house, carrying the pain of a genius torn apart by greed and ingratitude, leaving a void that no leap could ever fill. 7. Phyllis Hyman, the suicide note on the dressing table and the final sigh of the goddess of Harlem. Just before her performance at the legendary Apollo Theater in 1995, a chilling atmosphere descended upon the luxurious New York apartment where Phyllis Hyman, a woman of goddess-like beauty and a voice as deep as the abyss, had made her final journey into oblivion. On her dressing table, beside glittering boxes of makeup and the magnificent gown prepared for the performance, lay a note that left the entire Harlem community stunned. "I'm so tired." Her death at age 45 was not simply an overdose of sleeping pills. It was the collapse of an ivory tower built on the fragments of bipolar depression and the ruthless coldness of record label owners, those who viewed her extraordinary voice as nothing more than a money-making machine. Ironically, Phyllis chose to leave this world on Juneteenth, the day commemorating the freedom of the Black community, a cruel twist of fate piercing the hearts of those left behind. While the entire nation celebrated liberation, their diva found her only freedom, freedom from the gnawing pain within her soul. She had dedicated her youth to soothing broken hearts through her love songs. But when the curtain closed, her own heart was shattered beyond repair. The scene at that apartment was a bloody indictment of the fickleness of fame, a dazzling light that drains the sweat and tears of artists, but offers no arms wide enough to shelter them when darkness falls. The bitterness was truly evident in the people surrounding her coffin at her funeral in Harlem. The hard-faced music executives who had forced her to sing empty commercial tunes for profit now stood there with belated regret. In the back rows, where impoverished musicians and elderly Black women wept, it was clear they had lost a sister, a spokesperson for their own simmering pains. Phyllis Hyman departed, taking her distinctive, deep voice to the cold earth, leaving Harlem in somber silence and a stark reminder to a generation. Never let our women utter the word tired in a lonely, dimly lit room. Phyllis's aura was never a gift. It was a gleaming golden cage that she had strived to break free from in the most extreme ways. This death robbed one of the most exquisite voices of the 20th century, leaving the funeral scene steeped in regret and agonizing questions about the price of fame. As her voice echoed for the last time in the funeral home, it became clear that we had been cruel enough to demand only brilliance from them, without ever learning to listen to the cries for help hidden behind those soaring high notes. 8. Frankie Lymon, The Battlefield of Three, Marriage Certificates, and the End of a Forgotten Angel. Ngay giữa Harlem năm 1968, bên trong một nhà tang lễ nồng nàn nạc tử khí, tôn tử béo đã chịu đựng một cảnh tượng võ nhục nhã. 3 người đàn bà la mắt vây quanh linh cữu, tay đậm 3 lá giấy kết hôn nhậm nhúm như những lá bài sinh tử. Frankie Lymon ở đó, bất động ở tuổi 25, cái tuổi có lẽ ra là rực rỡ nhất, nhưng với anh, nó là điểm cuối cùng của một dọc kinh hoàng. Từng là cậu bé vàng của nhóm The Teenagers, người tạo cả nước Mỹ phải thở vì giọng hát trong trẻo như thiên thần từ năm 13 tuổi. Nay Frankie chỉ còn là một xác thân rộng mục, bị tàn phá bởi heroin cuối cùng trên sàn nhà sau của bà ngoại. Thay vì những giọt nước mắt xót thương cho một tài năng bị bức tử, căn phòng này lại biến thành một bãi chiến trường của lòng tham, nơi người ta sâu xé cái tên của anh ngay cả khi hơi lạnh của cái chết vẫn chưa tan hết. Cái chết của Frankie không đơn thuần là một nhiệm vụ quá rộng, đó là bản cáo trạng thái máu cho một thời đại đã kiệt sức trinh thơ của những đứa trẻ da màu rồi vượt chúng vào thùng rác ngay khi giọng hát bắt đầu chạy ghi. Khi sự nổi tiếng phục vụt tắt cùng tuổi dậy thì những hãng chủ đĩa da trắng, người dạy anh cách cưới trước ống kính để tiền, đã lập tức quậy chậm để mặc anh vật lộn trong cơn ngấp nước tại những ổ chuột tối tăm. Sự xuất hiện của 3 người vợ tranh giành quyền thừa kế ngay cạnh xác thân ảnh đã phơi bày một sự thật trần trụi. Frankie chưa bao giờ thực sự được làm người, anh chỉ là một món hàng được định giá, chia chác và lợi ích từ lúc đứng dưới ánh đèn sân khấu cho đến tận khi sâu dưới 3 tấc đất. Sự tàn bạo của những tờ giấy kết hôn ngay trước linh cữu đã trần trần nỗi cô độc đến cùng cực của một tâm hồn vụn vỡ. Trong nỗ lực tuyệt vời để tìm lại cảm giác được yêu thương sau khi được tự do bộ bộ, Frankie đã lao vào những cuộc hôn nhân chóng như cách anh lao vào ma chất, một nỗ lực tìm kiếm sự tái tạo nhưng lại nhận được sự phản xạ bội bội. Cay đắng thấy khi anh trục hơi thở cuối cùng trong sự cô độc trên sàn nhà lạnh, không một ai trong số họ ở đó để đón lấy tay anh. Vậy mà giờ đây, họ lại là những kẻ đầu tiên có mặt, không phải để chào, mà để tuyên bố quyền chủ đối với một cái xác đã hết giá trị sử dụng, nhưng cái tên vẫn còn ra tiền. Chứng minh kịch bản tranh giành di sản đầy kịch kích thước này giới hạn một giai điệu không nguy hiểm trước khả năng bạc bẽo của danh vọng. Những người quản lý cứ đứng từ xa quan sát với vẻ lạnh lùng, coi Frankie như một món đồ chơi hỏng hóc đến lúc phải thanh lý, trong khi chỉ có những người hàng xóm cũ từ khu phố nghèo còn giữ lại chút tiếc thương cho cậu bé từng hát dưới ánh đèn đường năm nào. Frankie Lymon ra đi giữa những tiếng cãi nhau chúa về tiền bạc, để lại một hiện trường tang lễ vui nhộn thực dụng và một bài học đau đớn cho cả một thế hệ. Thế gian này có thể tôn vinh bạn như một vị thánh khi bạn tạo ra lợi nhuận, nhưng sẽ sẵn sàng xâu xé cả xác thân cho bạn khi bạn không còn gì để cho đi. 9. Esther Phillips, Chunky Bracelets and a Chemical-Smelling Indictment. In the suffocating atmosphere of a Los Angeles funeral home in 1984, hundreds of crimson roses were scattered everywhere, yet they were utterly powerless to mask a cruel odor, the pungent smell of disinfectant emanating from the coffin. Esther Phillips lay there, the woman whose voice, like Little Esther, had once commanded the respect of even Aretha Franklin, now a frail corpse at the age of 48. On her thin arms, funeral home staff had placed large, artificially glittering bracelets. But these cheap ornaments could not conceal the horrific secret behind them: dark scars and countless needle marks, evidence of decades of heroin abuse. This ceremony did not resemble a solemn tribute to a star, but rather a desperate attempt to erase the scars of a death from liver and kidney failure, the consequence of prolonged drug use from her days as a child prodigy exploited for her labor. Esther's death was a direct slap in the face to the illusion of fame, exposing the truth that when the spotlight fades, you can be nothing more than a lonely patient in a cheap public hospital. The music industry consumed her hoarse, emotional voice as a commodity, turning her pain into profit, but leaving her to grapple with the monsters within herself. The pungent smell of disinfectant at the funeral was like a silent scream, denouncing an era in which black artists resorted to poison to soothe their emotional wounds, only to find that, upon their death, even the most alluring scent of roses could not conceal the decay of a body utterly ravaged. The large bracelets worn on her body were the final testament to a life never truly lived. While alive, she used her singing to mask her brokenness. In death, glittering metal concealed the scars of addiction. The contrast between the glitz and glamour of the jewelry and the pungent smell of chemicals created an atmosphere of extreme gloom, making mourners realize that Queen Kudu had actually died from years of agonizing drug-induced sleepless nights. This funeral was merely a belated formality to bid farewell to a soul long shattered in the shadows of the impoverished neighborhoods. Around the coffin, the empty rows of seats spoke volumes about the callousness of so-called artistic camaraderie in Hollywood. Those who once hailed her as a world heritage were now gone, perhaps fearing the chilling smell of disinfectant would taint their own glorious careers. Only impoverished fans, those who too bore the scars of life, dared to approach and touch the coffin. Despite the pungent medical fumes, Esther Phillips' passing left a vast void in the soul music genre, and a funeral scene reeking of chemicals, a stark reminder of the price of being too honest with one's pain in a world rife with hypocrisy. 10. Big Maybelle, an old cassette player, and the song Candy in the Abyss of Oblivion. Deep within a Cleveland slum in 1972, inside a dilapidated funeral home with peeling paint like scales, Big Maybelle lay there, cold and alone. The giant woman with the thunderous voice, the one who had laid the first bricks of rock and roll, was now imprisoned in an eerily silent space. Instead of powerful choirs or eulogies from the elite, the only sound bidding farewell to the Grammy winner was the crackling static from an old cassette player at the foot of her coffin. It was playing her hit Candy on repeat, but her once sweet voice was now muffled by the worn-out tape, as if the past itself were struggling to avoid dissolving into nothingness. Big Maybelle's death at age 48 was a direct blow to the greatest fear of black artists, being cast aside when they no longer fit into societal norms. As her body became overweight and her health deteriorated under the weight of diabetes, the entertainment industry immediately treated her as a liability to be liquidated. Maybelle breathed her last in a public hospital for the poor, penniless, exposing the bitter reality that black women with powerful looks and voices were often treated like emotionless, money-making machines. The silence of the press at the time was not merely indifference. It was a cruel memory assassination of someone who had dedicated her blood and tears to warming the hearts of the public. The dilapidated radio playing Candy in the empty room was a cruel irony of fate. The song celebrated the sweetness of love, yet in reality, Maybelle died deprived of affection and minimal medical care. This bleak scene exposed a dramatic contrast. While her voice still struggled to resonate through the old speaker, her massive body turned to stone in the cold indifference of those who had profited greatly from her. It was the most raw elegy for a drained genius, where music was no longer a source of comfort, but a mockery of a life abandoned within damp, moldy walls. Scanning the empty seats, devoid of any colleagues, one truly understands the price of solitude. No expensive flowers, no star arriving under the guise of friendship. Only the old cassette player remained, the sole loyal witness to Big Maybelle's moment of fading into dust. Her voice continued steadily and wearily, a final affirmation. Even if the world chooses to turn its back, the melody of this outcast woman will silently flow in the darkness, waiting for ears that truly understand the pain of a piece of candy thrown into the garbage dump of history. This indignation and sorrow is not only for Maybelle, but also the shared pain of a generation of great souls consumed and then mercilessly discarded by fame. 11. Sylvester, Broken Mirrors and the Last Rays of Light. Amidst the pandemic, In the dimly lit space of a San Francisco funeral home in 1988, a bizarre and conflicting scene unfolded. Hundreds of drag queens, rebels, and marginalized souls crowded the aisles, clad in glittering sequined costumes in a desperate attempt to defy the darkness. Sylvester lay there, the queen of disco whose soaring falsetto had once made the world dance, now a pathetic, emaciated figure. AIDS, a disease then considered a curse by society, had transformed the symbol of radiant freedom into a skeletal frame at the age of 41. In the flickering candlelight, the beads on the mourners' gowns reflected phosphorescent light dancing on the coffin, creating a chilling contrast between opulent splendor and the lurking scent of death. The scene was unlike any ordinary funeral. It is an unfinished night party, deprived of music by a virus, a memorial to an era when the lights of the dance floor were extinguished by cruel discrimination. Sylvester's death was a stark blow to the Achilles heel of American social hypocrisy. You can be a hero in bars, raking in huge profits with your hit, "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real." But when your breath carries the disease, the world sees you as a criminal in need of isolation. The raw reality lies in the cruel contrast. Sylvester used his last breaths to campaign for the infected black community, exposing the truth that disco fame means nothing in the face of government neglect and media disgust. This funeral became a silent protest where glittering suits were no longer for show, but the last vestiges of armor to protect the dignity of those rejected by the world. The candlelight reflecting on the sequins is the most bitter conflict, exposing a painful secret. The once dazzling disco lights are, in reality, shattered pieces of glass. Each flickering light on the cold stone floor is a soul slowly dying in a pandemic, with no one to help. This gloomy scene is living proof of a generation of Black and LGBTQ+ artists whose glory was drained while they were healthy, only to be thrown straight into the abyss of stigma when they needed a helping hand the most. It is the suffocating contradiction between the artificial glamour and the true decay of a society turning its back on the very people who created its joy. Looking at the heavily made-up faces, their eyes streaming with tears at the foot of the coffin, the callousness of the music elite was starkly evident in the empty seats. The record label owners who had profited from his voice had vanished to maintain their image of luxury, fearing that the stench of AIDS would taint their pockets. Only those with nothing to lose remained, using the borrowed glamour of their dresses and gowns to warm the cold corpse of Sylvester. He departed amidst a sea of flickering lights, leaving behind the haunting image of a world so cruel it could extinguish all dancing lights, but also proving that even in the abyss of death, the free spirit of a black diva could still burn in its most raw and magnificent way. 12. Otis Redding, a frozen lake basin with chilling vapors from the deep bottom of Monona. Inside a Georgia funeral home, amidst the stifling heat characteristic of the American South in 1967, a bizarre item placed on the altar beside the coffin left thousands of mourners speechless. A glass jar containing water from Lake Monona, where the water had frozen into a murky, icy block of ice. Otis Redding lay there, the man hailed as the King of Soul, who had used his fiery voice to warm millions of hearts. Now a pale corpse after being retrieved from the icy depths of the lake following a catastrophic plane crash. The scene was chillingly stark. The pungent scent of lilies could not mask the bone-chilling cold emanating from the jar of lake water, a cruel testament to how fate had used the cold of death to extinguish the brightest flame of black music at its most brilliant peak. The death of Otis Redding at age 26 was a deep gash in American music history, exposing the fragility of black heroes in an era where they had to fly on old, cheap planes to make their way between states rife with discrimination. The raw reality was that just days before, he had finished recording "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay," a song about hopeless waiting, only to find himself forever unable to sit on the dock again. The accident on Lake Monona not only claimed a life, it robbed a future where soul music could change the world, leaving a gaping void that no voice can fill, exposing the cruelty of fate targeting geniuses at their peak. The murky block of ice on the altar is a haunting, silent witness, revealing the secrets of his final moments in the darkness of the abyss. It reminds us that Otis passed away in the biting cold, alone amidst shattered metal and unfulfilled dreams. The presence of that frozen jar exposes a profound irony. The man who once used his burning breath to warm the souls of humanity ultimately ended his life in the embrace of ice. From that moment, his legacy was frozen forever at the height of his youth, transforming the funeral into a somber space where the warmth of music was extinguished by the icy chill of the murky lake water. Amidst the long, trembling crowd touching the cold glass urn, the cruel polarization of fame was evident. While record label managers stood in a corner, their eyes fixed on projected sales figures for posthumous album releases, impoverished fans simply wanted to share their last bit of cold with their idol. Otis Redding departed, taking the fiery breath of soul music to the depths of Lake Monona, leaving behind a funeral scene steeped in the chilling stench of death and a costly lesson about how quickly fame can be swallowed by the deep waters. 13. Nat King Cole, a silver ashtray full of ashes and the price of a velvety voice. Amidst the opulent atmosphere of a high-class Los Angeles funeral parlor in 1965, the scent of scented candles and luxurious orchids attempted to weave a magnificent veil to bid farewell to the most elegant gentleman of the century. But right beside the coffin, a small, discordant item, chillingly out of place, revealed the cruel death sentence: a silver ashtray filled with gray ashes and half-smoked cigarette butts. Nat King Cole lay there, the man who had used his velvety voice to soothe racial rifts on American television, now a frail body ravaged by lung cancer. At 45, at the height of his glory, he departed, leaving behind the ashtray as a cruel testament. The very weapon that created his distinctive, deep, husky voice was now the demon that was gnawing away at his lungs day by day. Nat King Cole's sacrifice is a stark portrayal of the price paid for a black artist to be recognized in a white world. To maintain his irreplaceable status, he turned himself into a living chimney, smoking up to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Not out of passion, but because of an extreme belief that smoke was the catalyst for maintaining his deep, mesmerizing voice, a lucrative signature that was also a contract with death. The raw reality that emerges from that smoke is the image of a genius silently destroying himself in exchange for a false sense of perfection to please a demanding public. The ashtray filled with gray ashes beside the body held the secret of an unending internal struggle. Behind the dignified demeanor and gentle smile in front of the camera lay the terrifying pressure of a man who had to always maintain his golden image. The painful contrast was stark. While millions reveled in the sweetness of his singing, Nat King Cole silently inhaled the dark smoke of destruction. The elegant silver ashtray was no longer a decoration. It became a memorial to the irony of fate, where the ashes of cigarettes and the dust of a lifetime mingled, denouncing the high price of becoming an icon. Looking at the rows of seats at the funeral, one could see the biggest names in Hollywood and politics, but the presence of the ashtray reminded them of a truth no one wanted to admit. This black artist had poisoned himself to gain acceptance and affection. While the press hailed him as a symbol of harmony, his loved ones could not hold back their tears at the sight of the half-smoked cigarette butts, a testament to a man who had breathed his last. Nat King Cole passed away, leaving an elegant void in jazz music and a painful lesson about how the world can consume talent as quickly as a cigarette burns out in a silver ashtray. 14. Billie Holiday, 70 cents on the shroud and iron handcuffs at the grave. In the cramped, stuffy funeral parlor in New York, the pungent, brain-numbing scent of white gardenias, billionaire Holiday's inseparable adornment, hoped in vain to drown out the stench of death and the thick, oppressive injustice. Lady Day lay there, the woman with the melancholic jazz voice, like the weeping of the Mississippi River, a great diva who had dedicated her life to singing about the pain of the human condition, ending her journey in 1959 in a silence filled with indignant rage. On the pristine white shroud, one was shocked to see 70 cents, the entire remaining fortune of a legend, lying there, a shameful statistic denouncing the utter misery of a life of silkworm spinning its last thread. The interior was enveloped in silent resentment, while outside the church, the figures of federal agents lingered like relentless hunters, maintaining a ruthless pursuit of a shattered soul even as she was nothing more than a lifeless corpse. Billie Holiday's death is a dark scar that exposes the brutality of the American legal system. They didn't just want to arrest an addict, they wanted to eliminate an icon who dared to use music to expose the crime of hanging black people from trees through her song, Strange Fruit. The horrifying reality is evident on her thin wrists inside the coffin, where deep red marks and bruises remain, the traces of the iron handcuffs that police used to shackle her to her hospital bed during her final days. While her liver was failing and life was slowly fading, she was guarded like the most dangerous criminal. And then, when she breathed her last, the 70 cents placed beside her body became a direct slap in the face to the conscience of a music empire that had exploited her and then abandoned her to die in the confines of her shackles. Lady Day's misery wasn't just about the pennies. It was the result of a prolonged, orchestrated suicide, orchestrated by a system intent on stifling the rebellious voices of black artists. A life ravaged by male abuse and the devastating effects of drugs ended in utter solitude within the cold walls of a hospital where compassion was replaced by arrest warrants. The most poignant aspect of this funeral scene is the irony of fate. The woman who once used her singing to reclaim dignity for an entire race was ultimately stripped of her own dignity, dying as a prisoner chained in the darkness of discrimination. The 70 cents on her shroud served as a final dying wish for a world where innate talent sometimes only earns contempt and cold handcuffs. Each wilting gardenia petal slowly faded in the dim candlelight, reflecting the bleakness of her glory. A dazzling light that could not buy even a single moment of freedom for a legend in her final moments. The presence of federal agents standing guard outside was stark proof that for people like Billie, death was not an escape, but the final note of a long-broken, sorrowful melody. She departed, taking her extreme poverty and hoarse voice to the depths of the earth, leaving behind a funeral scene reeking of injustice and an unceasing haunting memory of how cruel a society can be in its determination to pursue a genius to the very last moment, forcing them to lie there with 70 cents as a final humiliation for a radiant star. 15. Donny Hathaway, the earpiece in the coffin and the sounds from the 15th floor. In the somber atmosphere of the St. Louis funeral, one could not help but be shocked to see a large studio headphone placed prominently beside the severed head of Donny Hathaway, the soul music genius with a smooth voice but a shattered mind. Donny lay there, strangely serene, after his body was found on the sidewalk below the 15th floor of the Essex House Hotel in New York on a January night in 1979. The headphone was not merely a burial object. It was a witness to his haunting final years, when he continuously recorded strange noises and meaningless murmurs in the panics of his schizophrenia. The scene exuded a chilling solitude where music was no longer a refuge, but had become a labyrinth of hallucinations of electricity and invisible voices urging him to step through that fateful window. The death of Donny Hathaway at age 33 was a direct blow to the dark side of talent, when artistic sensitivity exceeds the limits of the human brain's endurance. The stark reality revealed that, in his final days, Donny lived in extreme paranoia, believing that entities were trying to steal his voice through electrical currents and radio waves. He didn't die from a lack of fame. He was recording with Roberta Flack at the time, but from the complete collapse of a nervous system exhausted by the invisible pressures of a black star trying to remain sane in a frenzied society. The fall from the 15th floor was not just an accident or a suicide. It was the final attempt by a great soul to sever the ghostly electrical currents that tormented him every moment. The headphones placed in the coffin are a painfully realistic twist, revealing the secret of a world of sound that only Donny could hear. It tells the story of a man who spent his final hours in the recording studio capturing the whispers of nothingness, believing them to be secret messages from the universe. The presence of this sterile piece of technology amidst the funeral wreaths creates a dramatic contrast. While the world mourns a golden voice, Donny craves absolute silence, something he believed could only be found on the other side of the 15th floor window. This somber scene illustrates the tragedy of a genius imprisoned within his own transcendent hearing, where every note carries the lingering taste of madness. Surrounding the coffin were the stunned gazes of his contemporaries, who understood that Donny had lost a battle no amount of medicine or lucrative contract could console. There was no applause, only a suffocating silence, a farewell to a soul weary of the noise of life. Donny Hathaway departed, taking his headphones with him to the depths of the earth, leaving behind a somber funeral and a question that forever hung over the top of the Essex Hotel. Had he finally found the silence he longed for, or was he still listening to the electrical currents running through eternity? 16. Dorothy Dandridge. The baby's cry wasn't loud, and the $2 receipt. In the heart-wrenching silence of a West Hollywood funeral home in 1965, where the eerie stillness of empty seats exposed the callousness of the film empire, Dorothy Dandridge lay there in a deathly silence. The once brilliant Carmen Jones, the first black woman to break through the Academy's defenses and receive an Oscar nomination for Best Actress, ended her 42-year journey not with resounding applause, but with the scent of cheap, wilting white carnations. But what truly broke the hearts of those present was not the cold coffin, but Harolyn, her daughter. In her early 20s, yet with the perpetually trapped intellect of a 4-year-old, Harolyn stood bewildered, her innocent eyes gazing at her mother, but seeing only a dazzling stranger. The child stood weeping in fear of the unfamiliar surroundings, completely unaware that the woman who had just breathed her last had drained her of every last drop of blood and every penny just to secure her a place in a public psychiatric institution. The harsh reality was laid bare beneath the white silk shroud of the coffin, a bank receipt for $2.14. That was all that remained of a once $1,000,000 icon, a stark testament to the inescapable financial collapse following scams and the abandonment by Hollywood. That fragile piece of paper stood as a humiliating final blow, denouncing a system that had drained Dorothy's beauty and talent, then thrown her into a black hole of bankruptcy when she was no longer capable of generating income. She died in her rented apartment, carrying with her the secret of a life stripped of all dignity, the right to motherhood, and even the last glimmer of hope for a home for her unfortunate child. Harolyn's cries echoed steadily through the desolate room, becoming the most horrific elegy for a genius who died from abandonment. Her innocent face beside her mother's corpse created a cruel conflict. On one side was the beauty that once captivated the world. On the other, the consequences of pain and destitution. Dorothy chose to leave this world with an excessive dose of tranquilizer, carrying with her the resentment of a black diamond quickly crushed between the gears of fame and racial discrimination. The $2 receipt placed beside her mother's soul was a bitter irony. In that glamorous world, you can reach the top, but the system will always find a way to push you back to the starting line with empty hands and a broken heart. Behind the fading carnations lies the darkness of oblivion from those who once pursued her. Directors, actors, lovers who once swore their allegiance, all are now absent, leaving Dorothy alone on her final journey to the depths of the earth. Her ultimate misery lies not in death, but in the fact that the cries of her child who never grows up are the only sound bidding farewell to a legend. Dorothy Dandridge departs, leaving behind a funeral scene steeped in bitterness and a gnawing question for an entire generation. How much have we allowed one of our brightest stars to fade away in cold indifference, so that, in the end, the only thing protecting her dignity is $2 and the innocent cries of a child who cannot even name her mother? 17. Baby Huey, the screeching sound of wood and the final burden of the giant. In a small Chicago church in 1970, the quiet space wasn't filled with fiery soul music, but rather shattered by a chilling sound: the screeching of wood and the heavy, labored breathing of 10 men struggling to carry a coffin. Baby Huey, real name James Ramey, the giant with the powerful voice and wild performance style that laid the foundation for funk music, now lay in a massive coffin custom-made to hold his body, weighing over 180 kilograms. The scene reached a desperate climax when the casket became stuck in the narrow doorway of the church, creating a violent struggle in the middle of the funeral. The sound of wood hitting the stone wall served as a cruel reminder of the physical burden that had tormented him for 26 years, now clinging on, refusing to let him leave this world peacefully. Baby Huey's death was a stark blow to the insecurity and pain hidden beneath the facade of a stage prodigy. His entire life was a desperate attempt to use music to fill the void of loneliness and self-consciousness about his overweight appearance. The raw reality lay in the collapse of an overloaded heart. Baby Huey died of acute heart failure, a cruel consequence of the combination of uncontrolled weight gain and heroin abuse as a way to escape reality. He used drugs to seek a feeling of lightness, to fly away from the body he despised, but ultimately, the drug turned his body into an immobile block of stone, leaving behind a funeral scene reeking of sweat and the helplessness of the pallbearers. The most somber aspect of this scene is the contrast between the free spirit of his music and the confinement of his physical being. While his recordings were full of explosive energy and spontaneity, his final moments were confined within the cramped square meters of wood trapped between the doorframe. The creaking of the wood is not merely a physical sound, it is the scream of a trapped soul. The impasse at the church door testifies to a painful secret. Baby Huey never truly found his place in this world, even in death. Society and conventional physical structures still lack the room to contain both his immense greatness and his overwhelming suffering. The sight of 10 men carrying the coffin, their faces flushed with exhaustion, clearly shows the price of a talent stifled by inner turmoil. There were no dazzling roses, no songs of glamour, only the stark reality of a giant departing in his own weariness. Baby Huey ended his short journey at the age of 26, taking his thunderous voice and an immense physical burden to the grave, leaving behind a haunting funeral scene that illustrates just how much weight a person can carry within them when they are burdened with unreleased pain. 18. James Carr, The Red Charm Bags, and the Escape from 30 Years of Darkness. In the candlelit funeral parlor of Memphis in 2001, James Carr lay there, the man hailed as the soul singer of soul singers, whose voice could move even the stones to tears with the tragic anthem, The Dark End of the Street. But beneath the luxurious shroud of a legend, there were no glittering mementos of fame. Instead, there were tiny red amulets, discreetly sewn and hidden under silk. Southern spiritual items, mojo bags, he had clung to in desperation to ward off the voices in his head. The scene was stark and painful, exposing the reality that even at the height of his fame, James Carr never truly lived in the light. He was merely a hostage held captive for 30 years in psychiatric hospitals and ravaged by devastating bouts of schizophrenia. James Carr's death at age 58 was not a surprise, but the final note in a sad melody that had lasted 3 decades since his freezing incident on stage in Japan in 1979, where he stood motionless like a statue amidst thousands of spectators. The raw reality lay in the spiritual impasse of a genius tormented by his own talent. For 30 years after his peak, while the world remained captivated by his voice, James Carr struggled in the darkness of electroshock therapy and high doses of tranquilizers in Memphis. The red amulets hidden under his shroud were the haunting truth, revealing the secret of a soul driven to the depths of superstition and fear in search of a peace that modern medicine had been utterly powerless to achieve. The somberness of this funeral scene lies in the fact that while a voice is celebrated, a man is forgotten, consumed from within by nameless panic attacks. Those red amulets are not mere superstition. They are evidence of the absolute solitude of a black artist trapped between traditional faith and schizophrenia, between the glamour of a star and the cheapness of a mental patient. The scars of 30 years of psychiatric treatment are etched on his face, transforming the uncrowned king of soul into a ruin of suffering, where every note he ever sang was essentially a cry for help, ignored by the world in exchange for selfish artistic enjoyment. Looking at his old artist friends standing with their heads bowed, one could clearly see a belated liberation. No more prescriptions, no more whispered voices in the night. James Carr departed carrying red amulet pouches into the deep earth, ending his long journey into the abyss of the mind. The funeral scene left an enduring, haunting impression of how a great talent can be silently destroyed when they bear the pain of humanity through their voice, yet cannot save themselves from the invisible shackles of the darkness of their soul. 19. Florence Ballard, Worn-Out Shoes and the Coffin of Betrayal. In a damp, musty funeral parlor in Detroit in 1976, the atmosphere was thick with chilling irony. Florence Ballard lay there, the woman with the most powerful voice, the true soul that gave birth to the legendary band, the Supremes, now imprisoned in a cheap, makeshift coffin, the kind reserved for the unknown. There were no vibrant bouquets of roses from the Motown empire, nor the glittering sequined gowns she had worn when she was at the height of her career. What brought tears to the eyes of those present were the worn-out shoes she wore, a stark detail that exposed the harsh reality of her final days living on welfare, trudging through the impoverished streets of Detroit after being mercilessly abandoned by her former bandmates and record label. Florence Ballard's death at age 32 was more of a prolonged murder of dignity than a typical heart attack. The raw reality lies in the treachery of her fame. From an iconic star with immense wealth, she was stripped of her rights, ousted from the band she founded, and ended her life in a dilapidated apartment with 3 young children. Those worn-out shoes were not just objects. They were the footprints of thousands of miles she had trudged in her desperate search for justice. The somber scene at the funeral home revealed a painful secret. The world may revere the Supremes, but they were willing to let its founder die in misery simply because she no longer fit the mold of false elegance that the powerful men of Motown had created. The hypocrisy reached its peak when the former employees appeared at the funeral under the flashing lights of the press. While Mary Wilson and Diana Ross stood there with dramatic tears, Florence's cheap coffin stood out as a silent indictment of the entire music industry. The worn heels of her shoes reflected the dim candlelight like a slap in the face to the glamorous diva title, a reminder that behind the dazzling stage was a mother who had been drained of her sweat, cheated out of every last penny, and left with nothing. This wasn't a farewell to a star. This was the scene of a historical betrayal, where the victim lay in the utter coldness of the very people she once considered family. Looking at that simple coffin, one can clearly see the price of daring to speak up for one's rights in a harsh empire. Florence Ballard passed away, taking her choked voice and resentment to the grave, leaving behind a funeral scene steeped in bitterness for a deposed queen. Her worn-out shoes lay there, silently beneath the cheap silk, a stark warning to those who still believe in the glamour of the spotlight. Hollywood and Motown may create angels, but they are also the first to dig your grave when your shoes are no longer shiny enough to walk the red carpet. 20. Professor Longhair, the snapped string and the unfinished blues of the King of New Orleans. Amidst the somber atmosphere of New Orleans in 1980, a chilling event occurred just as the farewell ceremony began, sending shivers down the spines of those present. A dry, jarring snap echoed from the piano in the corner of the room. A string suddenly snapped, as if in a mysterious spiritual resonance with the departed soul. Professor Longhair. Fess. The great architect who had molded the soul of New Orleans pianos with his masterful rumba rhythms lay there on the very day the world was holding its breath, awaiting his glorious return. That snapping sound was like a cruel cut of fate, severing the final melody of a legend just as he was about to reach the threshold of glory for the second time. Professor Longhair's death was a cruel irony of time, a dagger piercing the hopes of the jazz community. He breathed his last from a pulmonary embolism just hours before the release of his most anticipated comeback album, Crawfish Fiesta. This stark reality exposed the harsh realities of the life of a black artist. After decades of obscurity, scavenging in casinos, and living in poverty to survive, just as the dawn of recognition broke, darkness descended to engulf him. The funeral scene was not only filled with the scent of lilies, but also the bitter taste of regret, where brand new records, still smelling of fresh ink, lay beside a cold coffin. A painful truth that he had given his all, but was denied the final fruits of his labor by death. The incident of the guitar string breaking during the ceremony was not merely a physical phenomenon. For the people of New Orleans, it was the scream of a soul deprived of justice at the last moment. It exposed a painful secret. The artist had exhausted his last breaths in the studio to create a masterpiece, only for his body to collapse just as the task was completed. The somber scene in the church revealed the ultimate irony. While radio stations were beginning to broadcast the lively, inviting merriment of Crawfish Fiesta, its father was being bid farewell in suffocating silence, the only sound remaining as a mournful farewell. The gaunt faces of the brass band musicians mingled with the impoverished fans, those who had followed in his footsteps for half a century, became a mirror reflecting the fickleness of what is called the right time. Justice and worldly honor seemed to be bestowed generously only when he had become an immobile symbol, a corpse no longer capable of demanding fairness or legitimate rights. Professor Longhair departed, taking his masterful rhythms deep into the earth just as the city was preparing to celebrate his passing. This funeral scene, steeped in fate, left a bitter lesson about how late glory can come, and how sometimes the most beautiful piece of music by a genius is the abrupt silence following a broken string in a mournful atmosphere. 21. Alberta Hunter. The white blouse and the 20-year secret beneath the ashes of fame. In the quiet funeral parlor of New York in 1984, a strange scene unfolded that would tug at the heartstrings of anyone familiar with the history of blues music. The front row wasn't filled with glittering stars, but with rows of nurses and hospital staff in neat uniforms, their faces etched with shock. There lay Alberta Hunter, the woman who had once been the diamond of Broadway, who had captivated the world with her powerful voice, ending her 89-year journey in utter disbelief, even to her closest colleagues. For 2 decades, they had known her only as a dedicated nurse, a woman quietly caring for patients, never suspecting they were working alongside a living legend of blues music. Alberta Hunter's death was a powerful indictment of the heartlessness of the music industry. When a black woman reached middle age, record labels treated her like expired merchandise. The raw reality lay in her proud yet painful turning point in 1954. Abandoned by the entertainment industry, instead of giving up, Alberta erased all traces of her stardom, falsified her age to attend nursing school, and began a second life at Goldwater Hospital. The funeral scene reeked of contradiction, where the pristine white coat of a medical profession became the shroud for a diva's title buried under the ashes of oblivion for 20 long years. The somber atmosphere surrounding the ceremony stemmed from the tragic disconnect between two worlds. Her hospital colleagues stood there, bidding farewell to a beloved retired nurse, completely unaware that this woman had once been an icon of freedom and glamour on the world's most dazzling stages. The secrets of her life were kept to an extreme degree, as if she wanted to use the very silence of the hospital to punish a world that had once rejected her. This somber scene exposed a painful truth. To survive and maintain her dignity, a black genius sometimes had to accept burying her own brilliant identity in exchange for an ordinary, solitary job in the shadows of cold hospital corridors. The tears of the nurses surrounding the casket were the final, ironic note in Alberta's blues symphony. They wept for a kind old friend, while the outside world began noisily proclaiming her a legend. Alberta Hunter departed, taking with her the secrets of her years hidden deep underground, leaving behind a funeral scene steeped in the bitterness of one of the greatest disappearances in music history. Her white blouse remained a stark reminder. Glory may be taken away, but the dignity of an iron woman is never extinguished, even when she chose to depart anonymously into a community that knew nothing of her true identity. 22. Josephine Baker, the grim military fabric and the final dance of the dark-skinned goddess. Beneath the magnificent marble dome of the Madeleine Church in Paris in 1975, a poignant paradox emerged amidst the lingering candlelight. Josephine Baker, the woman who had captivated Europe with her fiery hip movements and provocative banana-shaped dresses, was now confined in a dark green French military uniform, buttoned up to her chin. The scene was so raw it was suffocating. It was not merely a funeral, but a cruel betrayal of her wild instincts. A diva who belonged to nakedness, freedom, and primal desires had to end her brilliant journey in the rigid, sterile confines of military ceremony, like a final iron cage imprisoning a soul that had never known shackles. Josephine's death at age 68 was not the peaceful departure of a legend, but the collapse of an ivory tower drained of its last drop of life. Just days before her passing, she was still seen whirling on stage, trying to save the Rainbow Tribe, 12 adopted children she had vowed to protect at all costs from the greedy hands of creditors. The Legion of Honor medals pinned to her chest now gleamed lifelessly, a testament to the hypocrisy of a nation that readily hailed her as a hero but turned its back when she was driven from her own palace, forced to weep on the steps in utter humiliation. That military uniform was, in essence, a final mask, concealing a body worn down by frantic efforts to prove that a woman of color was not merely a toy for the pleasure-seeking masses. The somber atmosphere at Madeleine's church reveals a dark secret about the price of recognition. Josephine had to wear men's clothing to conceal the deadly charm that had made her famous in exchange for an empty dignity. As the dry, mournful gunfire echoed through the streets, people were shocked to realize the fickleness of the applause. The world worshipped the Black Goddess when she danced brilliantly, but they only truly respected her when she had become a motionless, silent lieutenant. The scene stripped bare the hypocrisy of her glory, a light that consumed her beauty, and then forced her into the cold, disciplinary uniform to enter the earth with the dignity of a human being. The line of uniformed soldiers stood solemnly like stone statues around the coffin, creating a painful contrast with Josephine's free-spirited soul. They bid farewell to a resistance fighter with the coldness of ceremony, while impoverished admirers in Harlem or Paris wept for a heart that had burst with excessive love. Josephine Baker departed, carrying her wild dances into her grave beneath thick military gauze, leaving behind a funeral scene steeped in irony. The world only truly buttoned up a rebellious woman when they were certain she would never again stir their excitement or frighten them. Those metals remained forever cold, just as fame had abandoned her in the freezing winter night of her life, leaving behind an unceasing haunting memory of a black diamond polished to death to fit the mold of cruel standard. 23 Ivory Joe Hunter, the black smoke from top-secret music, and a dying wish to burn down a legacy. In the somber atmosphere of the cemetery in 1974, while the crowds were still immersed in the pungent scent of funeral flowers and prayers, a thin, murky, gray smoke began to creep in from behind, carrying the acrid smell of burning paper covering the coffin of Ivory Joe Hunter. It wasn't a fire, but a stark and suffocating scene. As soon as the body of the blues baron was laid to rest, hundreds of original musical manuscripts, priceless treasures never before published, were thrown into the flames, fulfilling his last wish. The smoke carried not only the ashes of paper and ink, but also a fragment of the unfinished soul of a genius who had chosen self-destruction to protect the ultimate purity of art. The death of Ivory Joe Hunter from lung cancer at age 60 was a poignant silence after decades of delivering mesmerizing jazz piano pieces. But the real Achilles heel wasn't the tumors in his chest, but the terrifying fear of betrayal from posterity. An extreme perfectionist and a fiercely conservative individual, Ivory Joe wasn't afraid of death. He only feared that his imperfect compositions would be manipulated, altered, and defaced by unscrupulous individuals after his death. The most raw reality was that he would rather see his life's legacy turn to dust in a cemetery than fall into the hands of a music industry he knew deeply about its treachery. The embers hovered above the coffin like dry farewells, transforming the ceremony into a haunting case of memory destruction. People wept for an artist, but also for the genius melodies that would never be heard again. Ivory Joe Hunter departed, taking the exquisite sound of the piano with him to the depths of the earth, leaving behind a cemetery reeking of burning paper and a painful lesson about how extreme a genius can become in order to maintain control of their own legacy. When the last flame died down, all that remained was a hazy black smoke, a symbol of a soul that chose self-immolation to preserve its dignity amidst a world steeped in scheming. The funerals of these black stars, whether somber or lavish, were, in essence, the scenes of a silent assassination orchestrated by fame and the fickleness of life. A testament to a life drained to its limits, yet denied a peaceful resting place in its final moments. If these buried truths resonate with you, please subscribe and turn on notifications to continue joining me on this journey to uncover the haunting hidden corners and untold stories of black legends in the entertainment industry.